G'day, welcome to my place. Come on in search of old wisdom for new times. Welcome to my place. This is where I live with Jane and with me dog, the Spoodle of Doom. We've come in through the front door and here we are in the lounge room. Beyond the lounge room is a small sunroom. This becomes very, very important in winter. We get lovely northern sun through here. Through this door we go through to the kitchen, and beyond the kitchen, the diner. There's a space through there back to the front door. And through here we go through to the bedrooms and the bathroom, and this way to my study and the loo. It's a great little house and we really enjoy living here. Let me take you to the kitchen while we prepare to do some cooking up old wisdom for new times. Welcome to the kitchen. This is in many ways the heart of the house, and this is why I want to talk to you about this house and why it embodies some ancient wisdom for new times. You see, I describe the house as my place, and in a sense it is, because I live here and I control what goes on here. But it's a really kind of strange occupation, because I don't own the house. It's owned, in fact, by the Baptist Union of Victoria on behalf of the Box Hill Baptist Church. I'm not a tenant. I don't pay any rent. And yet I have this wonderful occupancy of this beautiful house. Now, there are some strange things about my tenancy, because it's related to my being a minister and a minister of the Box Hill Baptist Church. And of course, the Box Hill Baptist Church at any time can choose to evict me, to say, no, you're not our minister anymore, you've got to go. But the stranger thing is that I can also be evicted by the Baptist Union. I live in the house under the trusts that were set up nearly a century ago. And if the Baptist Union thinks that I am either not living a moral life or that I have strayed from the doctrinal basis, I can be thrown out. So it's an unusual kind of tenancy. It's a very rich relationship and a rich way of having the use of a temporal good. Now, the reason I mention it and have explained it like this is that this particular way of being in a house really reflects, or has got many consistencies with, an understanding of the use of temporal goods dating from the 14th century. I particularly want to reflect upon the work of a thinker of the 14th century, John Wycliffe, a giant of the Christian traditions of the English-speaking world. Wycliffe was a scholastic philosopher, a theologian. He was a Bible translator and was responsible for one of the very early translations of the Bible into English. He's called by some the evening star of medieval scholasticism and also the morning star of Protestantism. His teaching played a big role in the teaching and the work of Jan Hus, a Czech reformer, who again was one of those guiding lights of the proto-Reformation, the pre-Reformation, before Martin Luther and the Anabaptists and the others got onto it. Wickliffe was somebody who had given a lot of thought to that tradition of the Franciscan order, where they really had big problems with the idea of property, and argued that property is not something that was essentially Christian. And what Wickliffe did a lot of thinking around what he called lordship or dominion. And he believed that all authority, all control over different parts of nature, all control over everything that is, flowed ultimately from God. So our use of things is not something that has to do with ownership or property, but with how our use of that temporal good would fit into the purposes of God. So it's very much like my occupation of this house. Once I step outside the purposes of God, in terms of either my doctrine or the morality of my living, I lose my tenure, my use of this temporal good. It's got nothing to do with money. It's got nothing to do with proprietorship. It's got nothing to do with a tenancy agreement, and I have very few rights. It is solely to do with whether I am in the will of God. Now, I've come to know a little bit of Wickliffe's work through this wonderful book, From Irenaeus to Grotius, a source book in Christian political thought. John Wycliffe explained his understanding of evangelical lordship, that our use of temporal goods has to do with our being within the will of God. He says this about property. Property was a device to deal with sin, the sin of lords perhaps, or at least of those who would not communicate their goods. So he opposed this idea of property. Instead of having to do with money and whether you could afford to buy something, he understood lordship, the control of some good or some object or some thing, being related to our morality and how it fitted in with the purposes of God. Not money, but morality was the mark of how we would manage the things of this earth. But the important thing for us to remember is that there is a moral and a spiritual dimension to all of our temporal goods. And although we might own things, and our ownership of it is still tinged with this idea of how does it fit into the purposes of God. Now, I was introduced to evangelical lordship very early, although I didn't understand it by that name. I was taught it when I was 6 to 7 years old in Sunday school, when we used to sing a particular chorus. And with that chorus, I'm going to leave you now. But I think you cannot teach young children to sing this kind of song and then be surprised if they end up questioning the power and the rightness of markets, or even feeling that there's a lot to be said for socialism. So sit back and hear old wisdom for new times, not from the mouth of John Wycliffe, but from modern interpreters, a group of children I've arranged to sing it for you.
Beyond the